Have you ever wondered why Iran keeps appearing in the world's headlines? Why it's involved in wars, secret pacts, and nuclear threats? What most people don't know is that Iran's story was written thousands of years ago, not by analysts, not by political leaders, but by God in the Bible. But the Bible doesn't call it Iran. It calls it Persia. And it mentions it from the very beginning, from the first pages of Genesis to the darkest visions of Revelation. Persia is not just an ancient name. It's a living prophetic thread that runs through all of sacred history, from the creation of nations to the end of time. And everything begins at a key moment, after the Great Flood. The earth was empty. Only Noah and his family had survived the great catastrophe. His three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became the new fathers of humanity. And in Genesis 10, we are shown what could be called the first ethnic map of the world. It is there that two names appear for the first time, Madai and Elam, two direct ancestors of what would later become Persia. Madai was a descendant of Japheth. From him came the Medes, a mountain people, resilient, organized, who lived in the northern region of what is now Iran. They founded villages, formed clans, and built their identity in the rocky heights. Their character was forged by the harshness of the land. Tough men, used to hardship, and their legacy would mark history forever. Elam, on the other hand, was a son of Shem. His descendants, the Elamites, settled in the fertile lands of southwestern Iran, near the Persian Gulf. It was a prosperous land, coveted and strategic, and it was from there that the first international war recorded in the Bible took place. In Genesis 14, it tells how four kings from the east, including Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, launched a devastating invasion into Canaan. This was not a tribal skirmish. It was a calculated attack with clear military objectives. They looted cities, took captives, even captured Lot, Abraham's nephew. But Abraham didn't give up. With only 318 trained servants, he launched a suicide mission against the invaders. By night, in the middle of the desert, he confronted them and defeated them. He recovered Lot, freed the captives, and overcame Elam. That day, a prophetic lesson was written. No power from the east can prevail against those who have the favor of God. But Elam did not disappear. It only stepped back. Centuries passed. The tribes grew. Cities expanded. The Elamites and the Medes, though distinct, shared the same land, ancient eastern Mesopotamia. And while other empires fell, a new silent force began to rise. First came alliances, then kingdoms, and finally an empire that would change history. The Persian Empire. A pagan empire, yes, but not outside of God's plan. Because the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah had already spoken about Persia. Isaiah declared that God would raise up Media and Elam to destroy Babylon, the city that had destroyed Jerusalem and burned the temple. And that is exactly what happened. But that wasn't all. God also said something no one expected, that a pagan king, not yet born, would be his anointed. He called him by name, Cyrus, a king who didn't know God, but who would be used by him to set Israel free and rebuild the temple. 150 years before his birth, his destiny had already been written. And that prophecy was about to be fulfilled, because in the 8th century BC, Deioces, the first king of the Medes, unified the tribes and founded Ecbatana, the imperial capital.
His grandson, Cyrus, reformed the army, destroyed Nineveh, and paved the way for a power that would rise from the ashes of fallen empires. But all of that was just the beginning. Because the next chapter of this story would not be written with armies, but by prophetic dreams. And a young captive in Babylon would be the first to see what was coming. Daniel.
When the Babylonian army crossed the gates of Jerusalem, the holy city fell into ruins. The temple was plundered, the walls torn down, and thousands of Israelites were taken as slaves. Among them was a Hebrew teenager with a steady gaze and an upright heart, Daniel. No one imagined that this young man, torn from his homeland and forced to serve in the court of the most powerful empire in the world, would become the voice of God in the midst of exile. While others surrendered to the corrupt splendor of Babylon, Daniel chose not to defile himself, and it was that faithfulness that opened the gates of heaven. God gave him a unique gift, the gift of visions, and through dreams he began to write what no human mind could ever conceive. It all started when King Nebuchadnezzar was troubled by a nightmare. A giant statue made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay stood before him with a terrifying presence. But he forgot the dream and demanded that someone both recall it and interpret it. No one could do it until Daniel was brought before the throne. And without fear, he declared, "You, O king, are the head of gold. But after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, then a third of bronze, and finally one of iron mixed with clay." Each metal represented an empire, and the second, the chest and arms of silver, was not a single nation. It was two peoples united, the Medes and the Persians. Two arms, one body, an imperfect alliance, yet unstoppable. Daniel, still young, still a slave, was announcing the rise of the next world empire, an empire that did not yet exist, but was already being formed by the hand of God. And that empire began to take shape under the leadership of an ambitious young man named Cyrus. Cyrus was Persian, but in a strategic move, he conquered Media and unified both peoples. Thus was born the Medo-Persian Empire, which quickly became the most powerful force on earth. And when he set his eyes on Babylon, the prophecies began to be fulfilled. One night, King Belshazzar, grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, held a wild banquet with 1,000 nobles. In the midst of arrogance, he committed a fatal sacrilege. He ordered the sacred cups from the Temple of Jerusalem, stolen by his grandfather, to be brought in. They toasted with them in honor of idols. Then it happened. An invisible hand wrote on the wall of the palace, "Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin." No one understood the message until they summoned Daniel, and with authority from above, he pronounced the sentence, "God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. You have been weighed on the scales and found lacking. Your kingdom will be given to the Medes and the Persians." That same night, the judgment came true. Cyrus had diverted the Euphrates River, and his troops entered Babylon through the dry riverbed. The gates were open, not by negligence, but because God himself had opened them, just as Isaiah had prophesied. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, "I will go before you and break down gates of bronze, and no one will shut them." Belshazzar was killed, and the throne of Babylon passed to Persia. A prophecy written 150 years earlier, fulfilled with mathematical precision.
But the most astonishing thing came next. Cyrus, a foreign king, decreed the freedom of the people of Israel. He allowed them to return to Jerusalem. He financed the rebuilding of the temple and sent their leaders back with imperial support. Zerubbabel, a descendant of David, Joshua, the high priest, they were the ones who laid the first foundations of the new temple. Persia, which had once been an enemy of Abraham, Persia, which attacked Canaan in the days of Elam, now became a refuge and a redeemer. The only empire that did not destroy Israel, but restored it. But Daniel's visions were not over. God showed him another image, far more unsettling. 4 beasts rose from the sea. The second was a massive bear, raised up on one side, with 3 ribs in its mouth. A voice thundered from heaven, "Rise up and devour much flesh." That bear was Media and Persia, raised on one side because Persia would dominate over Media. And the 3 ribs were its great conquests, Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. First, Lydia and Asia Minor, then Babylon, and finally Egypt under the reign of Cambyses II, son of Cyrus. The expansion was fierce, unstoppable, prophetic. But there was more. While Daniel stood by the Ulai River, a new vision shook him. A ram with 2 horns, one higher than the other, charged west, north, and south. No one could stop it. And the angel said, "The ram represents the kings of Media and Persia." Once again, Persia was there, not as a friend, but as an imperial beast. Powerful, proud, unbeatable. But suddenly, from the west appeared a male goat, as fast as the wind, with a single horn between its eyes. In an instant, it rushed at the ram and shattered it. It was Greece. It didn't exist yet, but Daniel already saw Alexander the Great defeating Persia with supernatural speed. The Bible didn't just announce the rise of Persia, it also foretold its fall. But that day had not yet come, because in its time Persia not only ruled the world, it became the setting of one of the most unexpected miracles in all of biblical history.
In the heart of the Persian Empire, in the city of Susa, stood the shining palace of King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes I. It was the capital of an empire that stretched from India to Ethiopia. And it was there, not through armies or prophecies, but through an orphaned woman, that God wrote one of the most powerful chapters in his story. It all began with a feast, a celebration that lasted 6 months, followed by a 7-day banquet for all the peoples. In a burst of pride, the king summoned his wife, Queen Vashti, to display her beauty, but she refused. Humiliated before all, Ahasuerus banished her, and his counselors offered a solution: to search throughout the empire for the most beautiful virgins and crown a new queen. That's how a young Jewish girl, unknown to the world, was brought to the palace. Her Hebrew name was Hadassah, but no one knew her by that name. In the court, she was called Esther. She had been raised by her cousin, Mordecai, a devout Jew who had been exiled to Susa years before. No one knew Esther was part of the people of Israel. No one imagined God had placed her there for such a time as this. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the palace, an ancient enemy was rising. Haman, a descendant of the Amalekites, the eternal enemies of Israel. The king promoted him to the highest rank after himself, and Haman demanded absolute reverence. Everyone bowed before him, except one, Mordecai. Wounded in his pride, Haman plotted a monstrous revenge. He didn't just want to punish Mordecai. He wanted to exterminate his entire people. He convinced the king that there was a scattered people with their own laws who refused to obey royal decrees. He called them dangerous, subversive. And with that argument, he sealed a decree of death against all the Jews of the empire, men, women, children, all to be destroyed on a single day. Panic swept across the people, and Mordecai sent an urgent message to Esther. But she hesitated. To enter the king's presence uninvited was a death sentence, unless the king extended his scepter. Finally, she chose to risk it all. She dressed in her finest garments, fasted for 3 days, and stepped into the royal hall. The king saw her and extended the scepter. God had given her favor. But Esther didn't rush. She knew she had to wait for the exact moment. She invited the king to a banquet, and then to another. It was during the second dinner that she dropped the truth like a sword. If we had only been sold as slaves, I would have remained silent. But our destruction has been decreed, me and my people. The king rose. Who has done such a thing? And she answered, without trembling, that enemy is this wicked Haman. The king's face changed. It filled with fury. Haman fell to his knees begging for his life, but it was already too late. On the very gallows he had built for Mordecai, Haman was hanged. But the royal edict still stood, and under Persian law, no decree could be revoked. So Esther and Mordecai proposed something bold, a new decree, authorizing the Jews to defend themselves on the appointed day. And the king signed it. That day, meant for their annihilation, became their day of victory. The Jews overcame their enemies, and by royal decree, the blood was stopped by the favor of God. Once again, Persia became a shield and refuge for God's people. After Esther's miracle, Persia began to fade from the biblical stage. The empires shifted. Rome took control. But Persia's silence did not mean its absence, because centuries later, when all seemed quiet, Persia would appear again. And this time, not with armies, not with decrees, but with wisdom, knowledge, and a star. When the world seemed to be wrapped in silence, when Rome ruled with an iron fist and Jerusalem waited in agony, a star appeared in the sky. And it was then, from the east, that men set out on a journey that would change history. They were not soldiers, they were not merchants, they were magi. That's how the Gospel of Matthew describes them. Wise men came from the east to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." But who were these men, really? The Greek word used is magoi, wise men, astrologers, priests, men of science and spirituality. And though the text doesn't specify their nationality, all evidence points to one origin: the ancient lands of Media and Persia, what we know today as Iran. In Persia, there existed an influential priestly caste called the Zoroastrian Magi, known for their study of the stars, their connection to ancient scriptures, and something more: a forgotten legacy. Because centuries before, Daniel had served in the courts of Babylon and Persia. He had left writings, visions, exact prophecies about the coming of the Messiah. From the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem to the coming of the Anointed One, the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, Daniel 9. The wise men of Persia likely read those texts. They studied them.
They compared them with astronomical signs, and when they saw the star, they understood. The prophesied time had come. The child had been born. Without hesitation, they left everything behind. They crossed deserts, defied empires, and arrived in Bethlehem, not with speeches, but with prophetic gifts. Gold, proclaiming the child was king. Frankincense, declaring he was God. Myrrh, foretelling his sacrifice. While Herod plotted his death, while the religious leaders in Jerusalem remained silent, the wise men of Persia were the only ones who recognized the Savior. It was a prophetic act, an echo of history. The same Persia that once freed Israel from exile, that rebuilt the temple, that rescued the Jews from genocide, was now the first to honor the newborn Messiah. And the most powerful part is this: no one asked them, no one sent them, no one expected them, but they knew, because they had read the Scriptures, because they understood the signs, because they listened to God in silence. That moment, often reduced to a decorative Christmas scene, is in truth a prophetic proclamation. Persia, the pagan nation, the nation that once attacked Canaan, now bowed before the Son of God. But that would not be the last time its name would appear. Because if Persia was there at the beginning, if Persia recognized the Messiah, it will also be present at the end. And this time, not as a worshiper, but as part of the final great rebellion against the people of God.
The story seemed to have ended. But God has not closed the book, because Persia, that same nation that once freed Israel, that recognized the Messiah, will appear again in the last great biblical prophecy, and this time on the dark side. The prophet Ezekiel, in chapters 38 and 39, describes a terrifying coalition that will rise in the last days against God's restored people. This is not a common invasion. It's an attack that will ignite the wrath of heaven. Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them. Persia, Iran, the first name mentioned, the same nation that once rebuilt the temple, will now be part of a global military alliance to destroy Israel. Who are the others? Gog, prince of Magog, often associated with regions in the far north, possibly Russia or a Eurasian coalition. Cush, likely Ethiopia or modern-day Sudan. Put, commonly identified with Libya or North Africa. Gomer and Togarmah, regions linked to Turkey and the Caucasus. Together they form a multinational force, a storm that will strike the Holy Land like a dark cloud. You will come like a storm, covering the land like a cloud, you and all your troops. But that rebellion will trigger the direct response of God. In my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath I have spoken. There will be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. The judgment will be relentless. Fire, earthquakes, confusion. Armies will fall by God's own hand. Weapons will be burned. Corpses will cover the fields for 7 years. And in the midst of the chaos, one phrase will echo. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Persia, once again, but this time as an enemy judged. And yet, even here, all is not lost, because the same God who judges is the God who restores. Long before Ezekiel, the prophet Jeremiah spoke of Elam, the ancient name of Persia, in a nearly forgotten prophecy. Thus says the Lord, I will break the bow of Elam, but in the latter days
I will bring back the captives of Elam. A dual prophecy. First, judgment. Then, restoration. And that changes everything. Because if Persia, even after rising against God, still has a promise of redemption, then its story does not end in ashes, but in hope. Maybe among the nations that will go up to Jerusalem to worship the king, Elam will be there. Maybe Iran, once an enemy, once judged, will return to the God of Israel. Because it is written, "And it shall come to pass that everyone who survives of all the nations that came against Jerusalem shall go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts." Will Iran be among them? Only God knows. But one thing is certain. From the first pages of Genesis to the trembling visions of Revelation, Persia has always been there. It was a threat. It was an instrument of redemption. It was the mother of a queen. It was the guide of the Magi. And it will be part of the end. Persia, the nation that began in the days of Noah, is still fulfilling its prophetic role today. And now that you know, I ask you a question. Do you believe Iran is fulfilling its biblical destiny today? Do you see the signs of these prophecies in the headlines? Are we living the final chapter? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you want more content like this. And share this video with someone who needs to understand that the story we're living was already written. And if you want to go even deeper, click now on the video on your screen. The 7 keys of Daniel to identify the Antichrist. Because if Iran is already moving, then the rest of the plan is unfolding too.